Hello, welcome. Welcome to today's talk on imposter syndrome anxiety. For those of you who are watching on the replay, please feel free to leave me a comment, and I do get notified of comments and I will come back and respond. And as you sign on, feel free to say hello. If you're on YouTube, you can just say hi. If you're on Facebook, I won't be able to see your name unless you give StreamYard permission, the technology I'm using to go live simultaneously. So you can also just put your name in your comment to me. So, hello, welcome Alan, welcome YSF Memories. Nice to see you guys. So I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome anxiety today. And first I'm going to define it. Then I will kind of talk about where it shows up, what implications it can have. And then the most important, what are the solutions? What are the things you can do? And I'm going to say this later again, but there's a lot of information out there that says you can never truly get over imposter syndrome. And I simply do not agree. So I'm going to come back to that. And if I don't, remind me, because you absolutely can recover from imposter syndrome anxiety and feel authentic confidence in your life. So let's see. Hello, Annie from Mexico. Jackie, nice to see you. Mary Lisa, Helen, hello, Joanne, Jess, Johnny. Welcome. And again, feel free to throw out questions, and I try to check them regularly. So while we're waiting for other people to sign on and stuff, let me know, just with a yes, a no, or a thumbs up for yes, whether you feel like you suffer from imposter syndrome. So you can just throw that on out there. Hello to Prestonick from Poland. Welcome. And Ethne, nice to see you again. And Jesus. Great. I'm glad everybody's joining on. So imposter syndrome is unbelievably pervasive, and there have been estimates that about 70% of the population have suffered from it at one point in their lives or another. So let's talk about what it is. Okay, I'm getting a couple of yeses. Yep, I assume if you're here today that this topic resonates for you. Okay, yes. Great. And for those of you who used to have it and don't anymore, when we get to the solutions section, I'd love to hear from you what things you have implemented on this topic. So imposter syndrome is a fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite the evidence you have that you are competent and capable. So let's go through that again. It is a fear of being exposed as a fraud. So there's a lot of components to that one phrase, despite the evidence you have that you are competent in your line of work or your role. So it is beyond self-doubt or occasionally feeling like, ooh, don't know what I'm doing here, or not sure I have the expertise in this particular situation. So it's beyond those sort of normal feelings that are going to kick in. It is more of a pervasive fear. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And that will tie in also to what the solutions are. So pervasive imposter syndrome it's driven by anxiety, and it increases anxiety, right? It's a very fear-based, anxious type of feeling. So it contributes to anxiety. It contributes to workaholism, overworking, because it also contributes to perfectionism, right? So there is a connection with perfectionism of like, I have to do this perfectly. If I don't do it perfectly, they'll know I don't belong here. They'll know I'm a fraud, or they'll know I'm not truly, at the level that I am at my job, that I shouldn't be here, that I'm not competent, or that I'm not really an artist, or that I'm not really a therapist or a coach. I'll be exposed if things aren't perfect. So that can cause people to overwork, which causes other health issues, causes relationship issues. And then on exactly the opposite side of that, it can also cause people to totally shut down, procrastinate, and avoid, right? Because when our stress gets too high, we sometimes just totally shut down. We go into freeze mode. So imposter syndrome can contribute to all of that. So hello to English is Fun from New York. Nice to see you. And hello to the Facebook user from India. It's great. What an international group we have already today. And Julia is sharing, this is so me. Okay, yeah, this impacts a lot of people. So this really limits people, and you can assess whether it's really limiting you, but it really limits people from fully bringing their gifts to the world. And this world we live in, this world needs the gifts from each of us, truly. So imposter syndrome can really have people hold back, not try a new career, not try a new angle within their career, not go for promotions, not take on additional projects, or as I said, the opposite of taking on way too much and being overwhelmed all the time. So it has a serious impact on how we interact with the world. So let's talk about the reason that this develops. And I would like right now to differentiate between people who are new in a career, right? Like this is very common among, say, college students or graduate students, and then also people who are first entering a career. So it can be very common in that grouping. And I would like to differentiate that group from the people who've actually been performing incredibly well in their career or their life or whatever role you are in. You've been performing really well. You have a lot of evidence of that, but you don't feel it. And you still are being driven by this fear. So let's just separate those two groups for a second, if we can. So the first group, when we start something new, when we move into a new role, it is normal to have more self-doubt and not really be sure how we fit, right? So it's not necessarily full-blown imposter syndrome. It still can be enough that it feels like it impacts you and holds you back, and it can be crippling to people. Yet the cure is more of an acceptance that you are going to be in new roles that are going to feel uncomfortable. New roles feel uncomfortable. And when I mention roles, there's two things that come to my mind: role playing and role models. So there's been some research that has shown that imposter syndrome is higher among women and minorities. And then there's other research that shows it impacts everybody. But I would like to share with you one reason I do feel that it impacts women and minorities within, and I know I'm speaking to many different cultures around the world right now, but if within your culture you are in a minority ethnic group or in other way, self-identification as a minority. One reason imposter syndrome can feel worse or be stronger is that you have not grown up seeing necessarily role models who look like you. So for an example, from my own life, I joined Wall Street in 1982. And I went to business school. I came back in 86 as an associate with a lot more responsibility. I was one of the only women in the department. I did not have any female role models in my life who had intense professional positions. And there was an element of like, I'm dressing up here, right? Like this was 1986. So we still had suits with those shoulder pads. Remember those? And for those of you who are younger, you may have seen pictures. I think I had a few silk shirts that had a little tie here, right? So dressing up in these suits that were completely uncomfortable to me did not go with my feeling about who I truly was, but that was what was needed to play that role. So it did feel like playing a role. And if we're playing a role, we're kind of a fraud, right? We're pretending. There's an element of pretend. But if we can become comfortable with that feeling of pretending, right? That feeling of, okay, I'm taking on a new role here and I'm going to have to experiment and play a little bit. It takes away the fraud fear. And another key thing that I learned early on was to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. So that if a client asked me a question, I would be able to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out. And I became very, very comfortable saying that. And I really recommend that actually as a tool, that if you don't know something, you can say, I don't know. One of the people who works with me right now on my online effort, she's great at this. She says, well, I've never done that, but I'll figure it out. Or I don't really know the answer to that, but I'll look into it. And I love it. I love it. It's honest and straightforward. Versus I've had other people who've worked with me who've said, oh, yeah, no problem, know how to do that, know that software, know this one. And then they don't, which leaves me in a much more difficult position. So practicing saying, I don't know, if you don't know, right? Not to engage in behaviors that are going to increase that feeling of being a fraud. Sean is sharing, a jack of all trades, master of none. I've imploded. Sorry to hear that. But being a jack of all trades, master of none can also be wonderful. It can be wonderful to have many skills in many areas. So we can embrace what our strengths are. And the strength of somebody who can be a master of all trades, there's incredible strengths under that. So embracing who we are and being realistic, right? And then this element of role models and being aware of whether there's role models or not. So another thing, when I was growing up, not many women were doctors, and I don't think I had many doctors who were not Caucasian. So not having those role models, someone growing up in my generation wouldn't have been able to say, oh, that person looks like me, I could do that too. And then of course we know here, we intellectually learn we can do that too. We're taught that, our society tells us it. We might see people beginning to do it, but that intellectual knowledge is not necessarily strong enough to overcome some of our imprinting. So we go into these situations without a sense of strong role models. So let me know if this is making sense. So for those people who are new to a career, new to college, new to graduate school, important to be understanding for yourself that you are trying on new experiences. You're learning, you're in a stage of learning. It's great. That's exactly where you are supposed to be. You are not supposed to have all the answers. You're learning. And some people who are feeling this in those early stages of career or education might actually have the deeper, more pervasive imposter syndrome. So this second set of tools that I'm going to share could be helpful for you as well. So let me pause, have a sip of water, and see where people are. Questions, what your thoughts are. So the deeper sense of imposter syndrome is really tied to a sense of shame. It's really tied to a sense of I'm not good enough. I'm not okay. And so I can get all these awards. I can have all these accomplishments. I can get great reviews at work. I can, climb the ladder or sell my book or sell my art or get an exhibition or whatever. I can have these external manifestations of success, but I'm still not feeling good enough internally, which then drives this feeling of what people might be perceiving and the feedback we're getting externally, which is different than how we feel about ourselves. So that's sort of the core nugget here. Yes, okay, Facebook user sharing, it definitely affected her that she didn't have role models. Yep, can definitely be a major impact. Oh, yes. Okay. So Mary Lisa, a great example of being new in a certain area, internship virtually with a company in a different country. I'm definitely overwhelmed with not knowing certain phrases and writing styles. Yes. So asking for help. I don't know. You're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to. People don't hire interns to know everything, have all the answers. And the more we can be okay with that, the more we can learn and grow and absorb, right? Where you're in a period in your career where you're absorbing information. So with regard to the longer term imposter syndrome, it is probably tied to negative self-talk, right? To the way that we talk to ourselves. And sometimes I have thoughts that go in two different directions, which when I'm live makes it difficult because I'm like, okay. But anyway, so negative self-talk is this critical judgment that might go on, and it might be like, well, yeah, okay, so you got that award, but really you were just lucky. Really, you just were in the right place at the right time. It just worked out. So you have this voice that is putting you down, or that voice that might prevent you from moving forward. That voice might be like, yeah, you're not going to get that job. You shouldn't apply because you're not going to get it. You don't have the qualifications. You don't have the background. Don't do it. So the voice might inhibit you from moving forward, right? So it puts you into that shutdown mode or avoidance mode, or it's just continually discounting your success and your ability to be fully okay with who you are. So the antidote for the negative self-talk is really to internalize a positive coaching voice in your head. Now, I know this sounds like, okay, I've heard that before. And yes, it's hard to do. It takes a lot of time. For those of you who've taken my webinar, I have a free webinar on rewiring the brain. It takes practice, practice, practice. It takes a lot of practice. And it might take somebody outside of you to help you see how pervasive that negative self-talk is, right? We aren't always aware. And even people who are aware will then do some kind of self-criticism around their self-criticism and not necessarily be aware of that level. So trying to solve the thinking issues that are happening in here with the same brain, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes we do have to go outside of ourselves. But pretty much beginning to imagine, what would a friend say to you in this situation? What would a positive coach say to you, right? So countering the negative self-talk, I would say that is one of the main things to work on. Number two, underneath negative self-talk, I work with this concept of a negative core belief. And what I have found in working with people is that most people have one or two very strong negative core beliefs that developed very early in life. And it could be both family conditioning, it could be societal conditioning, it could be conditioning from the school system you were in, or just the overall society, or your family of origin, but some conditioning that has led to some kind of negative belief about the self. And we probably have conditioning that has also led to positive beliefs about ourselves, which are wonderful and wonderful to build on. And so really transforming those negative core beliefs. And I do have a PDF on that. So if you don't have it, I will link it in the notes to this YouTube video afterwards, as well as on the Facebook page. So you could download this PDF, Transform Your Negative Core Beliefs. And I go through 3 techniques to begin to counter that. And I work with people on developing a good enough statement. So a positive core belief that uses the term enough. And I have other videos that talk about this in a little bit more detail, but I just want to throw this out because I do feel that is an underlying piece of imposter syndrome. So if I have a negative core belief from childhood, like I'm stupid or I'm just not good enough, then the positive belief would be I'm smart enough. Not I'm brilliant. I don't have to be brilliant. I'm smart enough, right? And then there's a lot of evidence for that. Or I'm good enough, like I'm a good enough human being, I'm good enough, right? So those positive core beliefs expressed in a reasonable manner, and then using techniques like evidence, like writing down what is the evidence that supports this positive core belief. And then also I suggest sort of a butterfly tapping meditation, but that's in this PDF that you can have access to if you would like. And Jess is also posting for me the webinar and the PDF. I'll come back and I'll do that. I'm not sure Jess has it. So beginning to replace your negative self-talk with a positive coach, going a little bit deeper to transform some of those negative core beliefs, asking for help, right? So we need help in our lives. We are interdependent human beings. None of us is completely independent. And so actually, when we talk about people who don't take responsibility for their success, there are others who might take way too much responsibility for their success. And it's all somewhere in the middle, right? Like we are all impacted by the family we're born into, the socioeconomic situation we're born into, the education of the family, the view of education, the ability to move forward, the racial stereotypes in our societies, the gender stereotypes, the sexuality stereotypes, like all of these things can impact us, right? So we all have strengths and weaknesses, and we've all had some luck and some bad luck, some good luck, some bad luck. So we're interdependent, right? And so having a more balanced view of this is important. Now, I want to say another key thing here is that with imposter syndrome, you are probably comparing your insides to somebody else's outside, right? So your inside of self-doubt or worry or not being totally sure how to handle a situation, you might be comparing that to somebody who presents in a completely confident way. And that is comparing your insides to their outsides. It doesn't work. And this also ties to the overall concept of comparisonitis. And for those of you who've been following me, you know I towards the end of December, I said, here's 3 things to leave behind before we move into the new year. And this was the 3rd one. So I'm a little bit late because I'm not perfect. I'm definitely not perfect. So anyway, I'm a little bit late with this one. But the first one was comparisonitis, and the second, perfectionism, and then imposter syndrome. So if we can leave behind comparisonitis, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome, wow, we would be so much happier. And they all 3 kind of go together, right? So I'm just going to run through again my suggestions here to sort of summarize, because sometimes the lives can feel a little bit unorganized. Developing that internal positive coach instead of the negative self-talk. Transforming those negative core beliefs. Asking for help. Not comparing your insides to somebody else's outsides. And then overall, that comparisonitis, right? And I work with a concept as well of authentic confidence. And that's where I would love to see all of you. That it's like, you know, I got my strengths, I got my weaknesses, I'm good at this, I'm not so great at this, but I am okay as I am. And I can show up and be me and bring the knowledge I have to those situations in which I'm an expert, and say I don't know when I don't know, and then play and then experience the different roles in my life, right? Because we all do have many different roles. So again, I'm just going to check here for any comments or questions on this. Jess has posted for the webinar. I'm offering it once more live in January, next Monday. So you can sign up for that. And I do talk about my 6-month coaching program in that webinar. And the coaching program is the Roadmap to Joy and Authentic Confidence. And really it integrates the tools that I feel are necessary to truly develop authentic confidence. This is not something that's going to happen like this. So mindfulness meditation, working on those negative core beliefs, developing deep self-knowledge and understanding and self-compassion, All of that goes into really beginning to develop authentic confidence. So I'm hoping this was helpful. Going to check here some more. Okay, so YSF memories. What do you think about imposter syndrome when you really are an imposter? For example, a person who has the good writing skills wanting to be an author. Okay, if you really are an imposter, this is not imposter syndrome. Aha, but are you really an imposter? So imposter syndrome is really a syndrome about somebody who that's why I differentiated between being new to a career and being established in your career, but just never feeling like you really belong there, right? So imposter syndrome is about when it is a pervasive feeling of being an imposter despite the evidence that you're not. So if you are a recent graduate or you're changing careers or you've been a mom and you decide, I've always had great writing skills, I want to be a writer, and you begin to tell people you're a writer, like, that's great. That's awesome. You could be telling them well, first of all, we're all writers, right? Like everybody can write. So have you written anything? Then you're a writer, right? If you are presenting yourself as a very experienced writer, if you tell somebody, hey, I've ghostwritten 7 books and it's not true, then that's not imposter syndrome, right? So really being okay with who I am and where I am in my career. Now, if I'm a writer and I've written, say, I've gotten 6 articles published, they weren't paid, say, like I didn't get paid for them, but they are out there and they are published. I can say, I'm a published author. I've written 6 articles. Here's some for you. You could even say I'm new in this career and therefore you get better rates with me than somebody who's been doing it for 30 years. So yeah, be real, be real. So hopefully that makes sense. An amateur doing something they shouldn't be doing. Again, that would not fall into imposter syndrome. It's hard for me to tell with the language being used, an imposter doing something they shouldn't be doing, right? Like, so if somebody has jumped from an airplane twice, right, done skydiving twice, and then they decide to pose as a skydiving instructor, I'd say they shouldn't be doing that, right? On the other hand, if they've been an amateur watercolorist and they decide they really want to be an artist and they're going to take that on as an identification and a role, there's no should there, right? That's great. That's great. It could be, I changed careers. I was in business my whole life and I am now pursuing watercolor as an artist. And no, I don't have any exhibitions yet, but I'm going to get one soon. There's nothing imposter about that whatsoever. Laura is questioning, I earned PhD and 2 master's degrees. I thought it was imposter syndrome. I think achiever's curse might be part of it. Well, that would depend what you mean by that, because imposter syndrome does impact people who are continually feeling like they have to add new degrees and that despite the degrees, they don't have the skill needed. So that does sound to me like an imposter syndrome situation. So imposter syndrome very often is felt by people who truly are high achievers, who the outside world views as a high achiever, and their sense of inadequacy keeps them driven to add new certificates. So, and Laura is saying she downplays her achievements for fears others will be turned off for what we've done. So that also comes to some societal conditioning. And as women in the US, right, I don't want to speak for the entire world, and I know this is an international audience, so you guys can figure out how this applies. But as women in the US, we're kind of trained not to brag about our achievements, that it's better to present yourself as equal to all others. And I have a lot of theories about why that's the case, but just knowing that that is a piece of societal conditioning can sometimes help you get over that. And I also want to say, being able to feel good about your own accomplishments and really know that you know your stuff, right, is different than bragging about it. So owning your accomplishments, and then maybe not giving excuses. And actually, I know we're beginning to run over here a little bit, but I also just want to talk about behavior, right? So most of us want our feelings to change before our behavior changes, but often we have to change our behavior first. So we have to change how we think and how we behave before the feelings change. So if you have imposter syndrome, think about what behaviors that is tied to. And if that behavior is tied to always saying to people, oh yeah, well, I just went through school and I don't even know why I achieved this, or I really didn't deserve that award. If you are saying things like that, one of the first behaviors to change would be to not say something like that. So when you get a compliment or someone seems impressed, simply say, thanks, I worked really hard for it. And just make that your behavior, even if you don't feel it. And you don't have to brag, you don't have to go on, but just, thanks, I've worked really hard for this. And so changing that behavior first. And then if another behavior that's in your way is that you're not standing up to be on a committee because you are feeling doubt about your capabilities, to push yourself and stand up for it. So again, if looking at what behaviors have come out of your imposter syndrome, and then beginning to change those behaviors, that will be the first step in eventually changing how you feel. Margarita, I feel embarrassed by my own accomplishments, and especially in front of my family. Yes, I hear that a lot. And I also think that can be both a cultural and a family issue of don't get too big for your britches. That's how it was said in my family, right? Like my family, I have Hungarian and Irish roots. And I think from both sides, you're too big for your britches. Yeah. Like if you think you know something, like, but you're, don't be too big for your britches. And then I've heard of other families where people have actually been said, don't tell your sister your grades because it will shame her because your grades are so much better. So hide them. Like, don't brag about having done well on that test or getting into that school, or, it's going to make everybody else feel bad. So don't do it. So yeah, that's some deep conditioning to recover from. Absolutely. Absolutely. Margarita's Hungarian. That's so funny. So funny. I related right away to what you said. Yes, these things can be very, very cultural. So, right. And Laura, Laura, you're bringing up some really interesting comments about how women are perceived in the workplace, and that if we're too strong or too definitive, then people will put us down by saying you're too intimidating. Yep. I should maybe I'll do a whole series on this topic, because that type of conditioning, which is really very pervasive, impacts us strongly. And if we can put a boundary out that, like, okay, that's happening because of the sexism, discrimination, racism, ethnicism in our world, right? Homophobia, whatever. If these things are happening for those reasons, how do I not take it in? How do I boundary myself so I understand I'm working in a difficult environment, but I don't let it impact my self-image? Very interesting. And YSF memories. Yes, I may have misunderstood your question. Sorry about that. It's not easy to change beliefs. You can logically agree with something, but not truly believe it in your neural network, subconscious. Exactly. That's exactly what I go through in that webinar of mine and in the work that I do with people. It's that our society loves to talk about mindset. Change your mindset. Change your mindset. Yeah, it's a great thing to do if you can do it. But so often the patterns and deeper beliefs are in our subconscious from all the conditioning we're talking about. You can work through that stuff. You can recover from it fully. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes some different approaches rather than just the mindset. Yes. Think of it. Agree. It's not easy to change stuff in the neurostructure. Not easy, but possible. And actually, I love this discussion that's happening today. Behavior behavior is encoded in our emotional brain. So the subconscious, those deeper neural structures, those are driven by behavioral patterns. They bring in, it's not so much information that we learn, it's a pattern of behavior. And our procedural memory. Procedural memory is unbelievably strong, which is why it's hard to change habits. But changing our behavior then gets encoded in a deeper way. That's really goes to the core of why I suggest focusing on behavior change. Because if we don't change our behavior, it does not matter how much we tell ourselves we shouldn't be feeling this, we shouldn't be thinking it. It won't matter. And it's also a reason I really recommend mindful meditation, because mindfulness meditation helps us develop that observer who becomes more aware of these patterns. And the more aware we are of them, the more we can change them. So Tina is sharing, I think my imposter feelings came from my family. My dad used to say, "What, are you better than her?" Yeah, I was a child. So now I have this feeling of fraud, even though I was a straight A student. Yeah, that is where that could easily be where it comes from. And there again, you have sort of that feeling within this family of like, don't shine too bright, don't shine too bright. So we have to learn. We have to learn how to shine bright. It's okay to shine bright. And that shining bright does not have to be a threat to our relationships if they're healthy relationships. Really, really, really. So, alrighty. Thanks everybody for joining today and for all this conversation. This is wonderful, and it's actually given me a number of ideas of topics that would be helpful for us to address going forward. So I'm hoping that I see those of you who haven't taken the webinar, I'm hoping I see you on it. And I look forward to moving forward. And if you have other ideas of things you want me to really narrow in on and target with a video, let me know. Oh, and please give me a like if you liked the session today. That really helps with the YouTube analytics, whatever it's called. I'm forgetting the word. And also on Facebook, you can give it a like if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed. And if you feel like this video would be helpful for someone you know, please feel free to share. Alrighty. Bye. Thanks for your time today.